Here are 7 things you need to know before selling your home. The first one is that home renovations are not necessary in order to sell your home. In this market where there are few sellers and lots of buyers, it really doesn't take much to be able to make a home or a listing look immaculate. You don't need to do any kind of bathroom renovations or kitchen renovations. These kinds of things are really reserved for a market where there are more sellers and less buyers, where you are competing with the other homes that are for sale and you're trying to make your home look like the best one on the market. But in this housing market where there's not a whole lot of competition, those kinds of renovations are not necessary. Now, some interior paint, yeah, absolutely. That could definitely go a long way. Maybe changing some light fixtures in the home if they're outdated. Absolutely. Those kinds of minor, different cosmetic things certainly help out a lot and really go a long way. Maybe if you want to change a kitchen countertop, if it's like that kind of super old school vinyl or laminate kind of countertop, then yeah, maybe changing something like that in a kitchen, even though it's a bit more costly than paint or lighting, but something minor like that absolutely can go a long way. Big kitchen remodels or renovations, absolutely not necessary. Hey, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Victor. I'm a local realtor in the Metro Atlanta area, and we put out videos every week about how to sell your home. Whether you're using a listing agent or you are doing for sale by owner, we're happy to help answer any questions that you have about the selling process. Feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. All of my contact information is below. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. We're always happy to help. But the next thing that you should know before trying to sell your home is the golden rule of listing your home. More exposure equals higher sales price. In other words, the more amount of people who see the home for sale, this is directly correlated to the price of the home that you get at closing. Obviously, if less people see the home, then you don't really get into those kinds of bidding wars, or you might not find the buyer who absolutely loves the home. So you want to make sure that a lot of people are seeing the home, and just listing the home on the MLS is not really enough anymore. We need to make sure that the home presents perfectly on Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, Trulia, also online ads, professional photography, videography. All of these marketing tools are really what is necessary to get the maximum amount of exposure for your listing. And then also you want to make sure that this is happening right away as soon as the home hits the market. You don't want to kind of piecemeal these things slowly and add them like the home has been on the market for a week and you're just now doing online advertising, or maybe it's been on the market for a month and you're now adding videography to the marketing. This kind of piecemeal is only going to hurt the listing as it's accruing days on market and starting to look worse to buyers. You want all of these things to come together in one package the day that the home hits the market. This next thing that you should know before selling your home is that many costs associated with buying and selling a home are negotiable. And mainly I'm referring to the closing costs. Now, in a seller's market where there are less sellers than there are buyers, typically these closing costs are paid for by the buyer. Now, it's very possible that the seller have to pay some of these closing costs. This is definitely something that's happening today, especially with a home that has been on the market for longer than is average in your area. If that's the case, it's very possible that the buyer asked you, the seller, to pay for these closing costs. So let's talk about what exactly these costs are and whether or not you would have to pay them. First of all, closing costs refers to the costs to close on the home. Typically, these are like lender costs. The lender is going to charge the buyer a fee for using their service, and then also the closing attorney who handles the transaction, transfers the title, records the deed. The closing attorney is also going to charge for these closing costs as well. So all of these things accumulate to what we refer to as closing costs. And while the buyer typically pays for them, it's possible that the seller could have to, again, if your home has been on the market for longer than average, it usually becomes a part of the negotiation process. When a buyer's agent or a buyer contacts the seller or the listing agent, they say, hey, we'll offer, maybe full price or close to full price for the home, but we want the seller to pay for a certain amount of these closing costs. It's not required. You're not required to pay for the closing costs as the seller, but it just depends on how much you want to sell the home and how much you're wanting to net from the sale of the home. These costs in Metro Atlanta, where I live, are probably similar to the rest of the country. It's about $5,000 to $10,000 for the lender's fees and the closing attorney's fees. Now, sometimes a lender includes prepaids and reserves in the closing costs, but in my opinion, that's not really the cost to close the loan. These are just reserves that a buyer must have in order to close the loan. Again, the closing costs are mainly the costs to use the lender and to use the attorney's services. Also, the commissions paid to the realtors involved with the transaction are part of the closing costs, and we're going to get into that more in just a minute. Okay, this next thing that you need to know before selling your home is property taxes. If in your area where you're selling your home, property taxes are paid in advance for the coming up year, then when you close on the home, if you have not already paid for those property taxes, you will be required to pay a prorated amount for those property taxes at the time of closing. Now, they will use the previous year's property tax bill if the new bill has not come out. They'll use the previous year's bill to estimate to the day how much your property taxes would be at the time of closing. And essentially, this would be reduced from the amount that you're receiving from the buyer or from the lender. So again, if you haven't already paid your property taxes, you will end up having to pay that at the closing table. Or maybe in most places, you have already paid those property taxes and now you're closing. And so what you will essentially do is you'll get a refund for those property taxes. Again, prorated to the day, and the buyer or the lender will have to pay for the remaining portion of the property taxes from when they take over the home. And they would include that in the funds that they're paying you for the home. This next one that you need to know about selling your home is that one of the biggest inconveniences of selling your home is the amount of people who are going to come into your home. And unfortunately, these are obviously strangers, and it's just a part of selling your home, whether it's showings and you're trying to find a buyer, or it's maybe a home inspection, an appraisal, maybe they're doing a final walkthrough of the home before closing. Each of these requires people to come into the home to see what's going on there. Maybe they're coming to see if they like the home, especially when the home hits the market and people have the most amount of interest in their home and they're coming to see it. This can really be the most inconvenient time, whether it's open houses. Usually a listing agent or a seller will block off a certain amount of time to have open houses, and then neighbors will come over who are not really interested in seeing the home. They just want to know what's going on. They're being nosy. Or it's buyers who are really interested in seeing the home. And so it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes, especially if you are now having to vacate your home where you're comfortable to allow a stranger to walk through the home. Preferably, if it's a buyer and they are coming to see the home, they will have a real estate agent with them who is making sure that they're not doing anything nefarious. So it's not really something that I would worry about necessarily. Inconvenient, yes, but not necessarily something that I would have to be worried about. Now, keep in mind that when you are doing showings or you're having an inspection or the buyer wants to come see the home before closing, you're not required to leave your home. At least this is the rule here in Georgia. It is still your home. And I imagine this would be the case anywhere in the United States. Until you close, it's still your home and you're not required to leave. The buyer or the potential buyer can't kick you out of the home. However, the less that the potential buyer feels like it's somebody else's home, and the more they feel like it's their home, the better the situation is going to be for the seller. The more the buyer is going to be able to give or is going to be willing to give for the home if they're envisioning themselves in the home. So if you, the seller, are still hanging out on your couch and watching your TV, this could be a turnoff for buyers. So this is typically the kind of thing that we strongly advise sellers don't do. You really don't want to be present for showings or for appraisals or even inspections. If there's nothing worse than you being home and the inspector scrutinizing every little part of your home and you feeling defensive. That's not really the best way to go about it if you're on the selling side of a real estate transaction. Okay, in just a minute, we're going to talk about commissions and who pays for those realtor commissions. But one last thing before we do so is the Zestimate. Everybody looks at those Zillow estimates on their phone and to see like how much Zillow thinks their home is worth. And while those estimates are not always like way off, they're not like absolutely wrong in those estimates, but you have to realize that Zillow is just using computer code to try to figure out how much your home is worth. And one of the biggest things that Zillow can't see is the interior of your home and the interior of the recently sold homes in your area. Zillow doesn't know the work that you've done on the home or the work that you haven't done on the home. So it's very difficult for a computer program to determine how much your home is worth, especially now in the seller's market that we're in. One of the biggest factors that determines the potential sales price for a home is what the interior looks like. Many of the exterior factors are similar across many homes, but how the interior looks is a really big deal. Is the home modernized? Does the home have carpet or does it have hardwood flooring? Zillow's not going to know that. What kind of light fixtures you have? Does the paint job look good? Is the foundation still intact? Again, Zillow's not going to know those things, but these are the kinds of things that a seller would have to disclose or show to a potential buyer and highly affects the value of the home. And then lastly, commissions. Who pays for realtor commissions? Pretty much for the last few decades, the way that it's gone in many cities across the US is that the seller pays for both the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. Now, there has been a lot of talk lately about trying to reduce these commissions or change who pays these commissions. In fact, there was an entire class action lawsuit recently from sellers suing the National Association of Realtors for this very thing. Sellers were arguing that they were too often required to pay for both sides of the commission, and they said that it wasn't fair. And so a big settlement involved with all of this. In fact, I made an entire video about the results of this class action lawsuit and what that means for sellers who are paying commission or not paying commission. You can see that entire video here. I'll see you in the next one.